Safety Water Quality District. And this meeting today is being recorded. And Emily, would you like to take the roll?
Yes, that sounds good. I'll start with Nancy Hendrickson,
I'm here.
Steve Fancher,
Here.
Eric Mueller,
Here.
hi, Dave Ritma,
Here.
Seth Reeser,
Here.
Ashton Simpson, not expecting, Lori Stegman,
Here.
Emerald Bogue, we're not expecting, Corky Collier,
Here.
James Allison,
Here.
Mary Helen Kincaid,
Here.
Tandy Stephenson,
Here.
Eric Molander, I see Eric there. I didn't hear him, but I know he's present. That should be everyone, as far as I know.
All right, great.
Eric,
Oh.
is your microphone working?
Emily,
looks
you
like
can
he's-
call me.
Oh, Heather, I'm sorry.
That's
You're not on
right.
this list? Heather King?
I'm here.
Great. Oh, yeah, sorry, there's a break on my page. So Heather, Ed Washington is not present. Bob Salinger. And that's it. Thank you, Heather.
All right, so we do have a quorum, so.
My internet seems choppy, so if I go off camera, I might be goofing off, but mostly it's because I want to be able to hear you all.
All right, so with that, I will turn it over to Lori Baker.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen. Oh,
Here,
I'd love to share my screen if I could.
I'd love to let you.
That'd be fantastic. Thank you.
Just a point of order, is this the budget portion of the,
Yeah, this is the
It
budget
is.
committee.
okay, and we call the budget committee in session?
Yes. Thank you for keeping us in line with the rules. All right, can you all see the screen? I will get going. So good afternoon to all of you. Thank you for coming. Your packet today includes a series of documents related to the proposed budget. We've included the original proposed budget presented to the board for your reference. That's also out on our website, which is a requirement of Oregon local budget law. Additionally, we've received a series of questions about the proposed budget from board members via email and have included those in a question and answer document. Finally, we have an updated forecast for the urban district for the current year, and we'll be discussing that update and related changes to the proposed budget because of those updates. This is a pretty normal process under Oregon local budget law. Might be new to some of us, especially those of us on legacy districts that are not required to follow Oregon local budget law. The urban district is. And so what you will see normally with the budget process is there'll be a proposed budget. And then as there's information that comes in and suggestions from board members, we'll bring back to you those suggested changes that could be included in the approved budget. Once the budget is approved, that goes out on the website for public reference and also gets forwarded with a checklist to the TSCC that then will prepare questions for us as budget committee members to answer at the TSCC hearing that is scheduled for June 7th. With that, I'm going to move on. So this slide is a summary of the updates for the proposed budget that we are asking you to consider today. First, on the resource side, we've experienced some increase in interest rates for our cash balances. And so we're updating our forecast for interest earnings in the current fiscal year. It originally was $8,000 and now is $12,000. So an entire whopping $4,000 increase, but every little bit helps. On the expenditure side, we've reviewed the materials and services spending and are anticipating additional savings for legal expenses of $75,000, bringing our anticipated spending to $50,000 for the year on legal. Additional savings of $5,000 for DEIA, spending, and using our most up-to-date spending on MCDD staff services, we're projecting savings of about $50,000 when compared to our initial forecast presented a couple of months ago. These savings allow us to increase our anticipated ending fund balance by $125,000. And the increased ending fund balance provides us with an increased beginning fund balance for the proposed budget, allowing us to start at $385,000 for the beginning balance. So we've got a few more resources carrying forward to help us balance that budget for 23-24. We're utilizing this increase in fund balance to increase our MCDD staffing support by $125,000 as well. We'll look at the breakdown of materials and services costs on the next slide. This slide summarizes the updated proposed spending for the urban district for 2023-2024. Administrative expense includes election fees of $220,000, that's a carry forward, and liability insurance of $10,000. Contracts and agreements is the updated amount for MCDD staff support. We'll review this in more detail on the following slide. And professional services includes legal of $100,000, consulting of $100,000, communications of $419,000, and community engagement of $68,000. The Q&A document has further details about those proposed cost budgets. Those have not changed from the proposed budget. This slide provides the detail behind the updated proposal for the MCDD staff support for the urban district. The projection for the current year costs has been reduced from $894,000 to $845,000 based upon current spending levels and year-to-date spending through March. In this column, you can see the details of the costs included in the budget for staffing. There are two components of this cost: the directly allocated staff noted here, and the staff who track their time and charge to the urban district each pay period. In the allocated staffing, we've reduced the allocation for the transition manager to 50% due to some anticipated changes in focus for this individual going forward. So this person is spending half of their time on the urban district transition and half of their time managing our administrative services at MCDD, and manages a couple of staff people and provides me a lot of support as well in my work. So I have a lot of appreciation for that person. Thank you, Emily. And the budget manager position has been removed from the direct allocations. That position is currently open, and we're evaluating what our needs are in that area. So the direct allocations cover 2,800 hours of staff time, or a little more than one full-time equivalent employee. Got ahead of myself here. We're projecting 2,370 hours of staff time, and you can see that breakdown between the departments for staff charging time directly to the urban district. We've added an overhead rate of 10% to cover other administrative costs for these employees. So the total employee hours anticipated for the upcoming year is 5,178 hours, which is just under 3 employees full-time. It's a variety of people, but adding them up, it's 3 full-time equivalents. For those of you who are interested in the FTE counts and the salary information for our MCDD employees, we've included that information in the proposed budget document for MCDD. That document was sent out to the MCDD board yesterday, and once we did that, we sent that to you as well. I apologize that the timing is so tight, but from an ethical standpoint, I have to send that information out to my board before I can send it out to the rest of the public, and you meet that category of the rest of the public in this situation. We've also provided additional information about MCDD staffing, including some information about the open positions that are in MCDD staffing right now, and that is in your Q&A document. So next steps for us, today you'll have more time to ask questions and discuss the updated proposed budget. We're asking the board to consider approval of the budget today to allow us preparation time for the questions that TSCC will develop. So the way this process works is once I've got an approved budget from my board, I need to pull together an approved budget document. That document will be shared with you. It will also be shared with the public via our website. Then I have a little checklist that's several pages long that I need to fill out for the TSCC. And I send that approved budget document and the checklist over to the TSCC so that their commissioners can take a look at our budget, develop their questions, and get those questions to me in time to allow us some time to support you with the answers to those questions that you'll be asked to provide at the TSCC hearing. And that TSCC hearing is a public hearing and it's scheduled for June 7th. We're scheduled to consider adoption of the budget on June 15th. And under Oregon local budget law, we're required to adopt the budget by June 30th, or if we don't, then we do not have the authority to spend any money starting July 1st. With that, I'm going to stop sharing. And I can take any questions that you have about the budget at this point.
Questions for staff? Not seeing any.
I have a question and I can't find my hand at the bottom, so
Go ahead, Mary Helen.
raise my hand. The request to approve a budget today that we've only had a small amount of time to look at. And I know I'm not, and everyone's heard me say this, I'm not the accountant of the bunch or the business person. So for me to be able to go through those documents and come to some sort of conclusion when we've been asking these questions for 9 months and then finally got them and then said, you need to approve them today, which was what, 3 days from since we got the budget proposal, seems far too difficult for me to be able to vote to accept the budget today. The focus has seemed to be for board members who can provide funding in case the budget doesn't get approved, or local jurisdictions like the city of Gresham, city of Portland, etc. And I feel a little bit slighted in that because I don't have a pocket of money, but I have a huge constituency that could cause a lot of problem to passing the GO bond if they don't get the answers of what's this going to pay for. And I've said that before. And I looked back and it was in January that I started asking those questions. What's this going to pay for? And there's different constituency than just neighborhoods. There's the Native American Community Action Group. I sit on the Ports Community Action Committee. When we gave our reports of what we're doing, and I was talking about being on the MCDD board, they said, and Emerald Bogue and Ken Anderton were not at the meeting, but I praised their involvement and their support for my Vanport Place Marking project. But I said they would have to speak to the port about how they see the process. But that they even asked the question seemed, I'm not alarming, but seemed of interest to me. In the budget, can you explain what undesignated funds are? Is that just money that can be spent and the board doesn't approve? And then my other question related to that is, what's the staff's definition of financially responsible? Because that's in the state code and that's in our mandate as board members. And so if by asking too many questions or not getting the answers I want, I feel like I'm trying to be financially responsible to my neighbors. And I don't know how that's viewed, because if it's by the staff, so I'd like an explanation of that. And also I thought the TSCC was June 5th, but I might have had the date wrong. But it is June 7th?
Yes.
Okay,
So I think there were two questions. The first was, what are undesignated funds? That's the fund balance for the district. And in the proposed budget, the ending fund balance is 0. The beginning fund balance, which is undesignated, just means that those funds can be spent for any purpose. They don't have a restriction. So they can be spent for the operations of the district. So we have a beginning fund balance of $385,000. We have resources of 1.2 million, which is the borrowing from the city of Portland, to give us the total amount that's available to be spent. And so when you're operating under Oregon local budget law, you need to have a balanced budget, which means the money coming in has to equal the money going out. And it's pretty normal for local governments to appropriate the entire amount and not presume that you're going to carry anything forward. So that's what this budget is doing, is it's appropriating the entire amount between consulting expenses and staff. The appropriation, just so that you understand, is a single appropriation. So the categories of spending could transfer between one another in those specific accounts. So if the board made the decision that they wanted to spend less on staff and more on consultants, for example, that could be done without making any changes to the budget, because the appropriation for this district at this point in time is a single amount.
so the process for that would be staff would come to the board and say, we want to use undesignated funds to do this.
There aren't any undesignated funds in this budget, Mary Helen.
Okay.
They are all appropriated.
Okay, and then
Yes.
that leads me to, sorry, because it just triggered another question I had.
Sure, I think I
the-
missed your second question too, and I didn't have
Well,
that one
yeah.
written down.
Oh, no, that's okay. What the board or what the staff defines as financially responsible in terms of the board. What our limits are. I've asked a lot of questions that seem to don't fall in line with what I think financially responsible is, asking how the money's being spent. And one of them is just the intergovernmental revenue that's in there to support community outreach, the $100,000. And the question was, $40,000 was set aside, I don't know the right terms, for MCDD and Pen 2, and then 10,000 for Pen 1.
That's where the money is coming from. So if you
Right.
pull the proposed budgets for each of those districts, they're being requested to approve funding to the urban district that will cover those communications and outreach costs to their area residents of that amount. So there's an equivalent matching spending in the proposed budgets for each of those districts. On the urban district, that's a resource. So that's money coming in, and that money is coming in 10,000 from the entities as you described. So MCDD and Pen 2 are providing $40,000, and Pen 1 and SDIC are providing $10,000. And that allocation was made, and that request for funding was made based upon where the populations lie and based upon the type of outreach and support that we want to do for those communities. So there are a larger group of resident population in Pen 2 and in MCDD. And so that's where we requested more funds from those districts than we did from SDIC and Pen 1.
Okay. So I did the math and took the numbers off the website of number of landowners in the different districts. And I apologize because it takes me a while to travel to where I'm sitting to get here, but in my other world of my hospital bed, I've got the notes, but the math was MCDD, if you took the number of landowners that are on the website and divided it into 40,000, that's $22 per landowner. Pen 1 number of landowners divided into 10,000 is $666. Pen 2 is $42 per landowner, and SDIC is $104 per landowner. And that doesn't seem equitable to me because, and the other part is Pen 1 has governmental agencies as landowners, so I don't know if they're in that mix. And so my ability to believe that there was some kind of formula of fairness in allocating those funds, and I can't find anywhere in the minutes of Pen 2 where we approved the $40,000, but
No, you haven't yet. It's in the proposed budget, so you
Okay.
have not had an opportunity to look at that.
sorry,
Um,
I've taken too much time, so.
No, it's okay. I want to answer your questions. So there was more of a process, and Colin can probably be better explain this than I, because I'm the accountant, so I would have done the same as you, Mary Helen. But the allocation had more to do with the communications planning than it did the number of residents or landowners that were in each district. My example makes it sound like that was the only factor, but there's a lot that goes into the decision-making and the planning around the outreach and the communication that we need to do. I know there were particular community areas of focus in MCDD and Pen 2 that really brought that allocation together, but I am going to hand the mic over to Colin because you're probably tired of hearing my voice anyway, so that he can talk about how that, that process occurred and how that decision-making took place, because I just know that there's more of a focus on the type of communication, and there were particular neighborhoods that we were really concerned about that were going to require those investments. So Colin, if you don't mind.
Thanks for the question, Mary Helen, and thanks for handing that over, Lori. So the budget really, as Lori mentioned, is based on the communication efforts, and it is with some historical background, I guess. And so at least for the last 8 years, this is the same way that we've apportioned our communications and outreach work. And I think goes back further than that. And it's largely based on a function of the population. So Pen 2 and MCDD have almost all of the residential population, pretty much it's like 99.9% of the residential population of the managed floodplain. That's really where most communication efforts within the managed floodplain have been focused and is most receptive. And there is an element of outreach that we do to business owners. And so that's across all 4 of the districts. We usually get a lot less engagement, usually send mailings, try to offer meetings, and try to get more involvement from some of those business owners, but it largely is focused on residential. And so that's why you see 40% and 40% in MCDD in Pen 2, and then the 10% in Pen 1 and in SDIC. And so that's something that we've been doing for many years, and it is based on sort of the reality of where our communication efforts are and what's most effective.
And just to punctuate, for Bridgeton in particular, all the design work that's beginning for the PMLS requires a lot of really direct engagement with neighbors, because we know that the design and construction activities will have a big impact. So that's why you see the focus of investment aimed at those 2 districts, Pen 2 and MCDD, where we know the planning and design work that we're engaging in on the capital program will have impacts. And we really want to do a great job so people understand what we're doing, and we can minimize disruptions to those neighborhoods and communities.
Okay, thanks.
Right, thank you. Eric Molander?
We didn't quite
Yeah,
track
hi. So
the fiscal responsibility.
Jim,
And if I may, I'm
what
sorry.
we need to do with
Yeah, hang
that
on a sec.
is, as you bring forward your plan for Pen 2, and in particular for the Bridgeton neighborhood, we need a little bit more detail on that so that we can justify that to the group. I know that the Bridgeton Neighborhood Association has already run a series of surveys on that. And it would be interesting to find out exactly how that $40,000 is going to be spent for our neighborhood. So as we go back to the heart of this, there's still a number of questions that we had asked as part of this that remain unanswered. If we go to the question that we had on major programs, we need a statement of the goals to be accomplished and key milestones. We've done a very good job in terms of breaking out the spending, but not the goals, nor the milestones, nor how we're going to measure the success of our program. So from my perspective, I think that that's an incomplete answer, but I am interested in finding out how you're going to measure the success or failure of those communications programs.
So I think I can maybe answer this, but in large part, as far as follow-up, it is largely from talking to our constituents afterward, right? And so we are at most of the Bridgeton Neighborhood Association meetings, East Columbia neighborhood meetings, at the Fairview Lake Property Owners Association meetings. We really try to attend as many of those as possible and be available and responsive to those questions. And so there aren't any survey follow-ups, kind of, you know, it's really a circular process of reaching out, getting input, bringing that input to the board for consideration, and hopefully having that reflected back out to the community. So that is kind of the engagement process, is to try to bring in as much information, not just information out to the community, but really to bring information in from the community to the board to consider and to incorporate into staff's recommendations and the board's actions. And so it is our responsibility to then bring that back out and let the community know. And so really appreciate, Eric, your role, Bridgeton Neighborhood and others, in getting feedback as far as how we're doing that communication, and understanding it's a difficult process and iterative, and major capital projects that go across nearly 20 years from inception to construction is very difficult. So appreciate any of that feedback.
Right, and so part of the feedback that I'm going to offer you is that we've already heard from our polling consultants what is required and what is capable when we start to present the positive message. And so as part of this, what I'm expecting from staff is that they would say that they are able to get those more positive messages out, and that the favorable construct of how people are thinking about the potential bond issue is moving in our direction. Fairly simple, fairly straightforward process for any sort of digital communications, and I would urge you to consider that as part of your plan. But I think that even more to the point, what is required in this is that we start to have something that is a measurable outcome that we're holding each of the departments responsible for. And so in your area in charge of this communications, and the way that you develop it with your own staff, you should be saying, we're expecting that we're going to have X% response rate to our surveys. We're expecting to have Y percentage of people becoming more favorable. And I think that those are things that we need to embed in the budgetary process. If we can move on now to the $125,000 increase in our cross allocation to MCDD. We're now projecting a favorable balance in that, but it really appears that this is a shell game, that whatever favorable balance that we generate in the current year for an ending balance is just going to some sort of mythical allocation to MCDD. I mean, I don't see the rationale in why each of those departmental budgets have gone up by the percentage that they have. I can't tie it to any sort of activity that we are requiring.
I'm afraid I don't understand the question. We don't have departments at the urban district. Help, are you talking about the MCDD budget? Or are you talking,
We
I
are being
apologize, Eric.
billed by department from NCDD for their spending that is summarized by department.
For the staff,
The staff
So-
allocations.
the
Okay,
staff
thank you.
allocations and the staff projections for direct billing. So
Correct.
what we looked at were the hours that were charged in the current year, as well as those staff that have been identified via IGA to be just direct charged to the urban
Yeah, so
district.
what charge, why did it go up by that exact $125,000?
Because that was the
feels like it's a
feedback that
shell
we
game.
received from the board members, as they were concerned that there was a subsidy between MCDD and the urban district because of the limited funding that was available. And so when we found additional carry forward dollars, where I placed those dollars was with the staffing. And what we believe now is that there's enough funding to cover the staffing costs that will be necessary to continue to stand up the urban district, the work that we need to do next year. And that we do not believe that there will be a subsidy on the MCDD side at this point. And so those
But
staffing
Lori-
hours there are just showing you what we've estimated to be the staff time that will continue the work that we're doing to stand up the urban district.
So my concern with that, Lori, is that you basically presented us with the budget in February that you knew was not realistic.
Correct, because I had limited funding and you have to balance the budget. And I think I was pretty upfront with the board about the fact that we had a subsidy at that point in time because there wasn't enough resource to be able to balance the budget.
And then since that time, we've held vacant positions open. We've cut back on staff working on the urban. We've tried to become more efficient, and we're reflecting that in our budget documents per board guidance.
So what is the real number that we have for the amount of effort that is being expended on activities that the urban district finds necessary?
I mean, that's the board's decision, but what we're recommending
No.
is
I mean, at this point, when we as the board of the urban district are looking for administrative support, right? What appears to be is that there may be another $100,000 or $200,000 worth of additional spending that I'm going to be hit for in 23-24 that's not reflected in this budget.
there's no way for us to do that. We had to reduce the amount of work going in because there wasn't enough resources. So we're going to have to scale back that work. We don't have capability at MCDD to track hourly time for staff. We can try and improve that, and I'm committed to working on that, but I don't have that data now. We're working with the consultants at Echo Northwest. We're working with communications consultants to try and pass a bond, and we're working with all of you to define and adopt a operating revenue structure. Those are the key pieces of work. We have engineers working on the capital program. We have finance people working on the operating revenue. We have legal working on all of it. And we have our communications people attempting to build community awareness and support. We can define that more for you. We haven't had the opportunity to do that because we're pedaling really hard. I sense your frustration and I want to address it. And I regret that I don't have that detail for you today. But we've attempted to follow the board's direction by reducing the amount of time MCDD staff is spending on the urban district to reflect the available resources.
Well, so here's the issue that we still are facing, Lori. You've given us a perspective that we're going to spend $845,000 in the current fiscal year for MCDD staff to do stuff for us. And the current budget has been improved by $125,000. It's now roughly $650,000, which includes $60,000 for, incremental, well, it's not incremental spending, for overhead, which is just budget relief for MCDD. Now, the question that you're going to be faced with is, what's the real number that we've got to come up with for next year? Because unless, looking at this budget, I can't vote for it. Because I think that the real number is more like $700,000 or $800,000. What's the shortfall that we're going to have to make up?
We can't make up a shortfall, Eric.
There's-
That's
there's-
how
Well,
Oregon local budget
at
law
some
works.
point
You can
next
only
year, you're
spend the
gonna
money
bill
that you
me-
have.
Next year, you're going to bill me for the actual time incurred. That's going to create a shortfall in my budget.
We are going to manage to the budget, just as we have cut back on the work that people are doing this year. I have a
Right,
budget
so-
appropriation. I am not allowed to overspend.
All right. So from your perspective, now that we've restored $125,000 of spending, that you're committing to having the total value of the MCDD intercompany billing to be $648,000. Is that correct?
That's correct.
That's a bold statement.
It's all the funding I have, Eric. I can't overspend.
Well, but last year we went over budget by $400,000.
In total, we are within our budget appropriation.
So
And
if
again,
you
we
cut
spent down,
someplace else, that budget is really going to go back to $800,000.
Last year, you had an erroneous budget as well. You had a $450,000 budget for staff. And it was based upon the people that are direct charge, not the people that charge their hours. There was an error in the budget.
I'm still unconvinced. You know, I am flabbergasted that we're getting this at this stage, and you know, this we all recognize that when we have a budget that is just a number that fits, that enables us to have expenditures equal to resources, but the real number is different. I still need to know what that real number is. Thank you.
Okay,
Is it 31 million?
no. Not this year anyhow. Seth Reeser?
Thanks. Thank you, Tanny. I just had one specific question and then a broader one that I just want to throw out. First, I was looking at the Q&A that was included in the packet, and there was a question that I had asked about the relationship for how that the underbilling by MCDD to flood safety for those services, since there's not money in the flood safety district, would eventually create a liability that would come back on the flood safety district's board's books whenever the existing district's dissolved. And so if you could include that in a updated one of those, I would appreciate it.
I didn't receive that question. Did you send that via email to someone?
It was sent to Jim.
my
Okay.
apologies if I missed that.
Yeah,
Sorry,
that was
Seth.
it.
And I think because we believe we've addressed that
Yeah.
under billing, that it won't be a liability going forward.
Okay.
My apologies, Seth. I have a lot of email. I want to be accountable to you and to the board. It's my mistake.
No, I get that. And then the second comment is a broader one. And I don't want to take up a lot of time, so I'm going to try and summarize it. I had to talk to my boss about the budget process, since we met with Jim and Lori and Colin to talk about some other issues that they'd reached out to us on. And so I told him we had the budget meeting today, and he was asking how it was going. And he wanted kind of an update. And so I told him that the staff was doing the best that they could with what they had. And that it was a technically sound budget and met all the criteria for local budget law. And then he was asking, What about the other parts of a budget document? You know, what are does the budget reflect the financial priorities of the district? Is there a plan for how to move forward financially with some definitive outcomes that then staff can be held accountable to? Like, are you guys basically setting staff up for success? And that conversation came up around kind of the bridge funding that we were talking about in that regard. And I had to say that as a technical document to meet the ability of the district to continue to pay people and move on with the work, the budget was fine. I don't think that there's a shared financial prioritization that the board all agrees on is what we are doing, or definitive steps on a plan moving forward and kind of a timeline for how we're going to get there. And I only bring that up because I know that you guys are working on it, but my concern is until we have those elements incorporated within a budget, I have concerns about how long is the bridge funding we would need to have the legacy districts continue to operate and do those assessments. How long is that going to occur? How much bridge funding are we going to need before we actually get to a resolution? And I couldn't answer that question for my city manager because I don't think there's a shared set of priorities. And as I was going through and looking at some of the meeting minutes, you know, something that Bob Salinger brought up of we need to make this movement from being individual stakeholders to sharing group priorities and a group plan. And I don't know that the budget is necessarily the venue to do that, but I think that that should be a priority for the board so that when we get to May of 2024, or I'm sorry, June of 2024, when we're out of money, essentially, that we have a plan for how that's going, how we're not going to continue to just kind of move along. And so, and by plan, I mean something that's tangible, deliverable, and I could take to my boss in terms of here's what we're going to be doing when we're going to be doing it. And I don't know what the answer is, but I know that we will have an answer by this time. And I also know that the board generally has agreed on these priorities, and that's what we're moving towards collectively. So again, I don't know that that's necessarily something we need to do as part of the overall budget, but I also think that it would be, speaking as someone who has to do a budget, if my council didn't give me what their priorities were and what the strategic direction is that they wanted to move forward with, it would be incredibly hard to put together a good budget because it would deliver on outcomes. And so I would kind of put that back on us as a board of if we really want to set our staff up for success, then we as a board need to come together and give them some clear direction and prioritization and spend more of our time coming up with that so that the staff can then move forward in a rowing, as my boss likes to say, rowing the boat in the same direction. So those are my comments.
Great, thank you. Mary Helen?
I agree with what Seth said, but what I've always heard is make sure your paddles are all going in the same direction or you'll tip over. And I couldn't agree more, but we spent, I'm thinking it was close to 7 or 8 months with the mission, vision, values statement. And I don't think that anybody would agree that we cannot follow that. It's how that's interpreted. And I think that would be an important part for us to revisit because that seems to keep getting redefined in different ways at different times. And another comment was about community outreach. Reporting back to the board is important. And when you talk about going to neighborhood associations, when they did annual landowners meetings, I've not heard that any kind of majority of landowners have ever attended the landowner meetings. And the response from staff was, well, that's the way it's always been. Well, the list that was used this last year, I and another East Columbia Neighborhood Association board member went over the list that we got from Wendy. And I would say at least 50% of the landowners were wrong. And I know she said that she got those addresses from Multnomah County, but a lot of them were in Bridgeton, for example, the owner of a condominium that is in LA got it, not the people that are in that own the condominiums. So there needs to be some sort of relook at the same old way, because that's not acceptable. Jim came to the East Columbia neighborhood meeting, and I think there were 9 people there. It was an annual meeting, and there's 750 residents in, and the information didn't get out. It wasn't his fault, but you have to know what the skills of the people that you're dealing with. And that's very important in reaching people, because as you all know, that have had anything to do with any kind of city council or public hearing, 3 people can turn the table on you and make your life miserable. It doesn't take a crowd. And if you get a crowd, you've got an even worse case scenario. I want to go back to just what we're paying for issue is, and I think Seth kind of touched on this, a business continuity plan. What are we going to do if we don't get a general bond? And the original answer was, there is no plan. And I've never been involved in any kind of management business nonprofit that doesn't have a business continuity plan. If you don't have money, what are you going to do? And this was a very small amount of money that I've stated before, but the sponsorship program for $35,000. The answer to that was, we don't keep track of the time. But it's minimal. I don't know what minimal equals. Is it 2 hours, 8 hours? If staff people are involved, I, as a board member who's responsible to be the sponsor and of whatever event that a staff member chooses, I don't think that it takes a lot of time to send one email to the board, because that happens all the time, to say, hey, we're doing a review for a grant applicant. If you want to come, you can. And if a board member or 5 board members show up because they have interest in whatever it is, that should be accommodated. And I would not support any future sponsorships in the way that they're being done, because of the lack of insurance and the lack of accountability and the lack of measurement.
Okay, so that's, okay, so thanks. And some of that's policy stuff that we're probably not going to get solved today.
Well, and just for the rest of the board, this board doesn't do sponsorships. It's a different budget. It's a different decision. It's a different meeting.
Right.
Right, I understand, but my point was, staff could not tell me what hours that they used. And so I would assume that goes through
Mary
other
Helen,
functions.
the board adopted policy that gives staff the right to do it the way we're doing. We've explained that to you. If during your Pen 2 meeting or a format meeting, you'd like to make a motion to change the delegation of authority, I would ask you to do that, because we're following what a majority of the board has allowed for us to do. And at the format meeting recently, where we discussed sponsorships, we received broad support. It's unfortunate that you had your medical condition and weren't there, but a majority of the format members appreciate and support the direction we're moving with the sponsorship program. So
it's not that I don't support it, it's just the way it's done. So I will bring that up.
But the rest of the majority of the board doesn't agree with you.
Okay, I apologize for taking up the time.
Thanks, Mary Helen. Nancy? Hello, Nancy.
Hi, sorry, just looking for the button. So I guess I want to, the point you were making before, Lori, about only spending the budget that you have, and Eric about, but wait, how much do we need? I just want to say that it resonates very much with me, being a city employee. We would do our job so much better if we had the resources we need, but we don't. So we just have to do the best we can. And that sounds perhaps like what's happening here. I think we have seen an example of a fully loaded budget for the future, and it was way too much. And we asked them to pare back. So I would say, and for priorities, I would say our single biggest priority. So me as an initial board member, like, how long am I going to be on this initial board? Because we want the new board, I think our single biggest priority is setting up the new district, which includes all the financial work that's being done, the collection work, thinking about elections and what's going forward, meeting all the pieces of our new mission, like all of that. I feel like the staff is working really hard on. I don't think there's enough resources, but we have what we have. And I'm just super committed to getting us on a better footing so it doesn't feel like a shell game because we have one district, not 2 or 5 or 6 or however many it is, but we have, I know how many, I know it's 5. But I would say that is our single biggest priority, and is one of the, the city is providing some current bridge funding in terms of a loan, and we would love to not have to provide that. So I really see to me, the biggest risk is not passing a budget. And of course, the second biggest risk is passing a really horrible one. But I think neither one of those risks is really facing us. I do think this is reasonable based on what we have. And I would like to just put that on the table.
Thanks, Nancy. Steve Fancher.
I think much of what I was going to say, Nancy kind of said. I feel like with the 17-member board, everybody, it's extremely challenging for staff. We need to acknowledge that right now. I'm feeling bad for. I mean, it's bad enough when you've got a 7-person board like I do. You've got a 17-member board. Everyone has different needs for level of detail with regard to this type of information. I think the legacy districts are used to dealing in a much more granular level than other folks involved in this, trying to think a higher, bigger picture as far as how we get this new district set up. I just want to remind folks that this is just the fiscal year budget we're dealing with. We're trying to answer a lot of the questions that are coming up, a lot of the concerns have to do with kind of the bigger picture and everything. And not everything's we need to pass this budget so that we can answer those questions. It's a cart and horse thing that we're getting caught up in constantly. And I'm prepared today to pass this budget. I don't think it's a terrible budget by any means, as like Nancy said. I know certain folks have questions that are lingering that they don't seem to, the disconnect in communication a little bit between kind of the answer you're getting and what you're expecting is not there yet. I get that, and I'm not discounting your questions by any means, but we need to pass a budget. We need to do it timely so that we can keep this moving forward. And right now, yeah, it feels like we're getting caught up in some minutia that I hope we can get past today. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks, Steve. Bob?
Hi, I think echoing Steve and Nancy here as well. They articulated where I'm at. So I don't want to add too much to it other than to say that, I think we all know that we have work to do to come to a unified vision. We have to do that work, but that's a work in progress, and trying to invest all that through a budget process that needs to move forward, I think is actually setting us back, because I think this is a reasonable budget, to echo the previous 2 speakers. I trust staff to stay within their means. I trust staff to make strategic adjustments as we go. I trust the board to review it as we go. That's our job, and make sure that we're on track. And I don't think we're going to get any closer. If it's up to me alone, I would do things differently than what is in this budget. But it's a reflection of whatever it is, 17 or 19 of us. So I think it's reasonable. It's forward progress. And hopefully when we come back and do it again, we're going to be in a more cohesive place as a board that will make it easier. But I'm also prepared to vote at this point as well.
Okay.
And I appreciate the work that's gone into it.
Okay. Thank you. Lori Stegman.
Thank you, Tanny. Yeah, I would just echo the previous 3 speakers. As somebody who we're just beginning our budgeting process at Multnomah County, with a $3 billion budget. And there are certain time hurdles you have to meet, or you can't spend money. So I feel comfortable with this budget. I feel it's imperative that we vote on it today so that staff can move forward. Thank you.
Okay. James?
Thanks, Tanny. Just quickly, I echo the previous speakers. I will just say from my position, what I've seen in the last weeks from the staff related to our next steps for developing an operating revenue methodology. Staff have quickly pivoted toward from what was really bad news a couple months ago to now some new and viable scenarios. Staff are meeting with Portland regularly, and this budget may not be granular enough for everyone, but it outlines the major things we need to do to get that operating revenue set up, pointing toward dissolution, continuing the work to understand our position when it comes to the GEO bond. So those are broad outcomes. I think the outcomes are there, and I think the staff have delivered and adapted to our needs. Planning and budgeting are two different things, but I'm confident that this budget gives us some resources to do what we can do and need to continue to do. So I'm very supportive. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Eric Mueller.
Yes, I would echo a lot of what has been said. I guess there's been a lot of questions raised, many of them which are policy issues, some of which cross from one district to another. And I'm not suggesting that any of them aren't valid questions, but I guess I would step back and say, this is a budget just for the urban district, just for the next 12 months. This is not setting in stone what we're going to be living with, going forward years and years and years. This is just what we need, from a process standpoint to get approved here so we can keep going forward so they have the ability to be able to operate after July 1st for 12 months. And so many of those valid questions that have been raised still need to be worked on. Staff still needs to do the research on. They still need to get satisfactory answers to everybody, but that's part of what's going to take several more months. And so it may be discouraging that we don't have the answers today, but approving this budget and moving forward doesn't mean that you won't get the answers. You're just not going to be able to get the answers before we have to move forward with the budget process.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thanks, Eric. Eric?
I hate voting for an unrealistic budget. It sets us up for chasing unfavorable and favorable variances throughout the year and misleading the board. But I think that with Lori's commitment that we won't spend more than $648,694 on the administrative expense for MCDD staff support, that she's made a really bold statement that we will live within that budget. And that even as other resources become available that we can spend on priorities, that number is not going to be raised. And that's an important statement for both Jim and Lori to make about this budget.
Only thing I would add is that if circumstances change and we have emergencies, we'll come back to the board and we'll get direction on how to address that. There are circumstances in the future we can't anticipate.
So are you waffling on the commitment to 648?
No, I'm saying we're going to do a good job and the board might need to address challenges that come up during the fiscal year.
That's completely reasonable.
Okay. So I've got a sense here that there's some people ready to vote on this. There's some people that have some questions that haven't been answered. But I also know we're up against a timeline, and I guess I'll ask directly, what exactly is our notice timeline to meet the TSCC for June 7th.
There is at least a week notice requirement, I believe. I don't know whether Lori has stepped
Okay.
away.
Hello, Lori.
The TSCC has worked their schedule around the time frame that they need to be able to get the questions back to us. And so
Okay.
it really just falls on me to make sure that I get the approved budget done and over to the TSCC.
And that needs to happen today.
No, I won't get the approved budget today because, to be quite honest with you, as soon as this board meeting is over, I'm taking the rest of the evening off.
Okay. But you need it approved today.
Yes.
Okay. All right. I
Mr. Chair, are
understand
you
that.
are you prepared to take a motion at this time?
No, I'd like to rant here for just a second and then I'll take a motion. Okay, if you
Okay.
guys don't mind. I am concerned, and we'll try to do some research, because I will say this, I'm very concerned if this board has an obligation to MCDDD for staff that they're not able to meet, and that is getting backfilled by the MCDD landowners. I am concerned about that, and I want to understand that myself, because I don't think we should be making decisions that we're asking somebody else to pick up the tab for. I think it's wrong. I also would have preferred to have the legacy boards approve the $100,000 donation, gratuity, kick-in, whatever, before we did it. I don't think we should put revenue sources in here that we haven't had someone approve for us. This is just me talking. So those are some things that concern me, and I think we can get those worked out. Also too, I'll just say, you know, for whatever happened with scheduling, I think we're still in a position where there's things on the budget that we need to be able to deliberate as a board. And I don't think that the April 6th meeting, that opportunity was given. We took public comment in which there was none. We had 10 minutes assigned to the budget, and that was basically going to be our deliberation time. And we didn't have answers to some of the questions at that point. And there was questions that came in after that point. And since then, we've gotten a lot of answers. I'm just saying it's a lot of people and it's a lot of things going on, but I think we can do better and we need to do better in the future. Because I think the people that we represent are going to expect better from us, from all of us. That's my rant. Mr. Mueller.
Mr. Chair, are you prepared to take a motion?
Yes, sir.
Then I would move to approve the urban flood safety water quality. I'm sorry, let me read the resolution properly. Approve a resolution of the Budget Committee of the Urban Flood Safety Water Quality District approving the proposed fiscal year budget for 2023-2024 for budget submission to the Multnomah County Tax Supervising and Conservation Commission, resolution number 2023-0401.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve resolution 2023-0401, which in summation is approving the budget as submitted by staff. Are there any questions on the motion on the floor?
And I guess, Mr. Chair, this is just the Budget Committee's approval. This is ultimately going to come back to the full board in a board meeting
Right,
later in the cycle.
but I think we have to approve it here first.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah,
Yes,
That was my question, because how that Lori's comments that she needed approval today for the TSCC.
Yeah, the board has to approve the budget. It goes to TSCC. Once TSCC approves it, it comes back for adoption by the full board.
Okay, so excuse
We're
me
making-
for not understanding what you just said, but the budget committee approves or disapproves it, then the Urban Flood Safety Water Quality District approves it, then it goes to TSCC?
This budget committee is approving the budget, the proposed budget to send to the TSCC for their hearing on it. Once they approve on their side, whatever public accommodation or accountability criteria they're approving, your proposed budget is accepted by them, it'll come back to this board for then adoption, and we'll go through the same process with the resolution and all of that.
And the board has the ability to make changes to the budget up to the point of adoption.
Yes,
Okay,
we are
thank you.
approving the budget now. Okay, any other discussion on the motion? Everyone got that? Okay. Ms. Robertson.
Sure. Let's see. So I'll start with Nancy Hendrickson,
I vote yes.
Steve Fancher,
Yes.
Eric Mueller,
Yes.
Dave Ritma,
Yes.
Seth Reeser,
Yes.
Lori Stegman,
Yes.
Corky Collier,
Yes.
James Allison,
Yes.
Mary Helen Kincaid,
I vote no because I'm still not clear what it's gonna pay for and how I'll explain it to my neighbors.
Tanny Stephenson,
Yes.
Eric Molander,
Yes.
Bob Salinger,
Yes.
and Heather King.
Yes.
That passes.
Mhm.
Our work here is done for the moment. And I want to thank everybody. I know we're over time, but this was a good discussion and I think we needed to have it. So with that, we will adjourn the Budget Committee meeting and call to order the regular board meeting.
Thanks, Danny.
Thanks.
Thank you, Tammy. And I've been told that I'm having a reverberation issue with my mic, so I'm going to ask if James Allison is willing to take chair of the rest of the meeting.
As I'm taking a bite into my apple, that's great timing. Yes, but I have to take my sons to track practice about 4:50, so I have to sign off. We're going to go ahead and do we need to do a new roll call for the rest of the agenda?
I think, I think we should.
Okay.
I don't believe that there are members in and out, but just, I think for the record, we should.
All right. Then let's start at the top. Nancy Hendrickson.
I'm here.
Yep. Steve Fancher,
Yep.
Eric Mueller,
Here.
Dave Ritma,
Here.
Seth Reeser,
Here.
Lori Stegman. Here. Corky Collier.
Here.
James Allison,
Here.
Mary Helen Kincaid,
Here.
Tanny Stephenson,
Here.
Eric Molander,
Present?
Bob Salinger,
Here.
and Heather King.
Here.
So absent, we have Ed Washington, Emerald Bogue, and Ashton Simpson.
Great, thank you, Emily. So I believe we're moving on to item 3, vote for the March minutes. And there are 2 sets of minutes that are in your board packet, one for the work session minutes from March 1st, and then the board meeting minutes from March 16th.
And one note from Wendy, the version that was given to you listed, it's a minor correction that will be in the final version of the minutes, but that March 16th set incorrectly listed that January minutes were approved in that meeting, but it was actually February minutes. So we'll change that for the final version.
Mr. Chair, I would move to approve the March 1st, 2023 work session minutes and the March 16th, 2023 corrected board meeting minutes.
Thank you, Eric. Do we have a second? Great.
Second.
Thank you. Thank you, Eric Molander. Any discussion on the topic? Hearing no need for discussion, I think we can just do a voice vote for this. Is that correct? Great, thank you. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All not in favor, say nay. Any abstentions? Great. Item 3 is passed. Thank you, folks. Moving on to item 4, authorization and delegation of financial transactions. Lori, are you ready to be up again?
Hey, Jim, we've got 50 minutes on this that's related to the long range geo bond. Lori, are you okay with pushing this to next time through?
This is actually just some updates to our regular delegations in order to have new staff added. So we're working to automate the banking processes right now and just need to get this staff person added so that we have authorization for him to be part of the new control process that we're implementing.
The authority already, the delegation already exists, Eric, and I think in
Correct.
this particular proposed resolution, it's just adding additional staff in light of,
It's adding on Hell because his position did not exist with the last vote.
And this is part of financial accountability to the board.
Then, so Lori, do you want to take it from here?
That's about it.
I think we just need a
That's it.
motion. Yeah, we're adding on Hell. He's a new person. We need your authority to add him so we can continue to do work on your behalf.
Well, if that's all it is, then we're just updating the existing policy.
That's correct.
Updating people under the existing policy.
Correct.
That's correct. There's no changes to the existing policy. It's just that we have a new assistant finance manager who needed to be added into the mix.
We're following the policy the board adopted.
Gotcha. Well, if that's the case, Mr. Chair, I would move approval of resolution 2023-0401 of the Urban Flood Safety Water Quality District, amending the resolution and delegation of financial transactions.
A second.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Seth. Nancy, do you have a question? Okay. Any discussion needed on the topic? Okay, I think this one, should we do a roll call vote on this one? Great, thank you. Emily, would you mind?
All right, Nancy Hendrickson,
Yes.
Steve Fancher. Yeah, I see. I visual, yes. Eric Mueller,
Yes.
Dave Ripma,
Yes.
Seth Reeser,
Yes.
Lori Stegman,
Yes.
Corky Collier, Corky, sorry, I see you moving.
Yes.
Yes, got it. James Allison,
Yes.
Mary Helen Kincaid, Mary Helen, are you there? Okay, we will skip Mary Helen. Tanny Stephenson,
Yes.
Eric Molander,
Yes.
Bob Sellinger,
Yes.
and Heather King.
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Great, thank you, Emily. Thank you, folks. Looks like item 4 passes. And we are ready to move on to item 5, general obligation bond details with Carrie.
Well, I'm going to pass it pretty quickly over to Jamie and Bill for this presentation.
Great. Thanks,
And
Carrie.
just before we start, this is going to be one of many conversations. So there's going to be a lot of time, and I know Jamie's going to cover that, but I know this is of deep interest to all of you. And so again, you asked a lot of good questions. We've done our best with the time we had to provide responses, but we know there's a lot more conversation and work to do on your behalf, on our behalf, to get you guys comfortable. And you have many, many months before we're going to call for any decisions here that are of major consequence. So please keep that in mind.
Thanks for that, Jim. And yeah, I'll remind you of that as well. Hello, Chair Fancher and board members. Jamie Damon here with Kearns and West, leading your communications and engagement team. Bill and I have a presentation for you that builds on the handout that Carrie and Bill and others really have put together for you to answer a lot of the questions that we know that you've had about the GeoBond details. So Bill, do you want to share? Do you want to share the PowerPoint, or do you want me to?
Why don't you go ahead? Thanks.
Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and I'll put up the PowerPoint, the slide deck that we've got. Get a little bigger here. Excuse my slight delay. There we go. All right, so some of these first few slides are going to be familiar. And before we jump in too much, I just do want to do a time check. Chair Fancher, are there substantial other business items, or how much time do we actually have for this? Because we've lost about a half an hour.
Emily, maybe you can help me answer that. Or I'm sorry, and James is taken. Am I still reverberating? Am I still
Yeah.
echoing?
You are.
Going.
This,
so
this is the last
Chair
item. This is the last item on the agenda, other than kind of other business. So I think you should be fine to go
Okay.
up to the time.
All right, great. So Bill, we're doing this a little bit on the fly to adjust our time. So Bill, I'm going to move through all the slides pretty quickly to get to your map slides, and then hand it off to you just for to the slide or two just before the map slides. We want to make sure that we're focusing in on the new information for all of you, and we want to retain as much time as possible for any large group questions that you have. And so I'm going to try to have us, Bill, you and I, be done with our presentation piece by what time is it? By 4:30 or so. So that way we've got time for the board. Okay, great. So these first few slides are ones that you've seen before. It's always good to remind us where we are in the process. And again, we're in the middle of developing these bond scenarios. These are slides that I shared with you before about, what are the objectives that we're trying to achieve? And then what do we know? Our systems at risk. These are all slides that we've shared with you before, and we got you the slides in advance, so they're in your packet. So hopefully you've had a chance to look at them as well. The inputs, we've shared this with you, what went into creating the bonds, because this is our third presentation now with you about the GeoBond. And then what we need. The bond measure is the best path to making needed improvements. And the costs are well beyond our legacy districts. This is information that you all know that we've shared with you as well. So I want to focus in on the handout and how we wanted to walk through the conversation with you today. So the purpose of the handout was to, let me scoot my people over here. The purpose of the handout was to respond to the questions and anticipated information needs regarding the scenarios. So we've had a couple of meetings with you now. You've asked us a lot of questions. Carrie and her team went back, put together the handout that's in your packet. We want to make sure that you have enough information about the scenarios so that we can take them out to the public for their input on your behalf. So that's what we're trying to get to, and that's the purpose of the handout. The handout is for your eyes. We've talked about key messages and other materials that we're putting together. That's kind of a more generalized version of what you see in the handout, but the handout is really for you. So the way we organize our discussion for today is you've got the handout in your packet for reference. We have 3 maps that show each one of the scenarios on a map. And you can follow along, with the details in your handout, but Bill's going to walk through each one of the scenarios on a map so you can see where the projects are and what the, I'm using the term progressive disclosure of the full build out could look like. And then we had set aside 30 minutes for your discussion. We'll do as best we can to retain that for all of you, to give us feedback, to prepare us for our public conversation and any additional follow-up that we have for you. I've got a brief poll that we were going to do. It's just a temperature check. It's not a vote. We're just want to get a sense of where you all are. And so when I get to that, hopefully we'll have time to do that brief poll. And then as Jim said at the beginning, we have time on the May 3rd agenda and the May 18th agenda to continue this conversation. We're really hoping to get the green light from all of you, by the May 18th meeting or at the May 18th meeting for us to begin our conversation with the public. So, and the other piece I wanted to share is just, the scenarios, they're a starting point for the GeoBond conversations. So the draft bond funding scenarios were created to begin this discussion about, the range of things that the needs that you all have, and what those look like in different packages. We're going to be going out to the public, as we've talked with you already, to gather input on the different packages to see kind of where the public is at in terms of their level of support and what the priorities are to help you make your decisions. We will provide engagement updates and technical issues at every board meeting moving forward. I appreciate Mary Helen and Eric and others in the budget conversation talking about metrics, for the communications program. How will we know if we're being successful, and that you want information to bring forward? And so we'll be bringing that information forward to you at every meeting moving forward. And then you as the board will have the option to refer a bond measure in late 2023. And again, we're still looking towards that May 2024 election cycle. Eric, I see your hand up. What's up?
Oh, sorry, the microphone there. I guess I just wanted, I wasn't clear when you were talking about referring to our handouts, and I wasn't sure that I was looking at the right place, or am I getting ahead of things?
Nope. If you look in the packet of materials for the meeting for today, there's a memo from Carrie, and right after the memo from Carrie, there's a table of contents, and I don't know how many pages is it.
Okay, so it's that section that starts on page 75 of 111.
Yeah, whatever the beginning page is right after Carrie's memo.
Okay, sorry, thanks.
No worries, it's good, but other people probably had the same question. So I know I went through those slides super quick, but we want to make sure that we have time to hear from all of you. And so I'm going to hand it to Bill, actually, Bill, why don't I just talk through these next two, and just hand you the map ones. That sounds good. Okay. So again, these are slides that you've seen before. All the scenarios include the PMLS, the Portland Metro Levy System cost share, the Federal Emergency Management Administration accreditation projects, the multi-objective design of flood safety projects, the nature-based flood safety. I have to move this over so I can read. To be guided by the watershed plan, safe and functional facility, and for operations, and a citizen oversight committee. So all scenarios include all of those. And that I put this note on here, there's some additional detailed cost for all projects currently underway. Bill can talk about that just a little bit. We think it's helpful to make sure that we've got, just numbers from a third party to make sure that folks are feeling comfortable with the cost estimates. So that work is underway. And then just a reminder of the three different bond scenarios that we're talking about. The $175 million is the baseline flood safety that staff is recommending. The $200 million is improved upgraded flood safety. And the $250 million is the comprehensive flood safety. And when I say staff is recommending the 175, it just means they're recommending that's the place to start. All right, Bill, you're on.
All right. Bill Owen, I'm Chief Engineer at the Drainage District. Good to be with y'all. I have two screens going on, so you'll see my head going back and forth a little bit to just know that I'm paying attention, but I'm looking at some notes. So the first scenario we're looking at is the $175 million one. It includes levee upgrades that are meeting our flood safety standards and access. It's about $100 million worth. In addition, we're upgrading failing and underperforming pump stations that reduce the risk of internal flooding events. This increases the capacity of those pump stations of 5 of the 12 pump stations that the district manages currently, and those pump stations are ones that myself and others at the district identify as the highest current flood risk of our drainage system. So the asset management and risk components are included in our selection of which projects included in this scenario. There's redundancy and resiliency added through here through backup power capacity in cases of outages, as well as some nature-based flood safety improvements similar to like wetlands and flood storage, wetlands that can be used for flood storage, and other things you've heard of in past presentations. There is a component here for a safe and functional facility for routine and emergency flood management operations. That's part of this initial scenario. There are district-led projects that integrate environmental, cultural history, and other good neighbor elements that support our flood safety mission embedded in here. And wanted to note that all the district-owned pump stations would be designated to convey at least 25-year storm events under projected future conditions. So there's some comments previously about level of service, and so we're suggesting here that the pump station would be able to convey the 25-year event. There is the $150 million version of the scenario that we had talked about in previous meetings. You can look in your packet to see what elements that are in that. The only things that are in here but not in the $150 million one includes 2 pump stations, Schmear Road and Penn 2, and 181st pump station in MCDD. And the third item is some levee resurfacing elements. All 3 of those are in this $175 million version, which staff is proposing as our baseline, but they are not in the $150 million. Again, details are in your packet. Next slide, please. So as the next slide comes up, it's the $200 million bond scenario. Includes all the features for the $175 million scenario. It also includes the replacement of 4 of the 6 aging pump station motors. For those of you who are on the tour, these are the very large motors we saw at pump station 4. And these 4 motors, 2 of them at 4 and 2 of them at pump station 1, would need to be replaced. Would be replaced as part of this bond scenario. Those 2 pump stations are the most critical ones in MCDD in order to mitigate for flood damage in the district. In addition to that, this scenario also includes a replacement of some of the levee toe drains. These are perforated pipes at the very toes of the levee, at the bottom of the levee on the landward side. Their design life will be over in 2030. For some of you that you know enough to be dangerous, and that some of those pipes could last longer depending on the situation, but they will be the end of their design life at 2030. And so we want to be proactive and making sure we have funds to replace those that are needed. And as we look at the last scenario, the $250 million scenario includes all the features of the $200 million option. It replaces the final 2 aging pumping systems. Remember, in the previous one I said 4 of the 6 large pumping systems would be replaced. This would replace all 6 of them. And finally, it also includes either the rehabilitation or replacement of the 70-year-old concrete flood wall in Penn 1, as well as some additional money to repair any additional toe drains. So those are the 3 scenarios that we have put forward to you. Again, details are in the handouts, and I think I'll stop there and to make sure to leave as much time for questions as possible. I'll give it back over to Jamie.
Great, thanks, Bill. Sorry about that. My power went out just for a brief moment. Hopefully I'm back. Okay, great. Thanks for nodding, Jim. I appreciate that.
Thanks for coming back.
Yeah, I know. I was surprised that came back so quick. So these are the questions that we have for you right now. And Eric, I see your first in the queue. So what we really want to hear from all of you, and remember we have time on the May 3rd and the May 18th meeting, is what questions do you have to understand the scenarios better? And what additional information would be helpful for you when discussing these scenarios with your community? And we're hoping that, you know, we can hear from as many of you as possible. So Eric, I'll go ahead and start with you.
Sure. So let's get that Bill back up here. So Bill, the PMLS, as you see it now, that was at the total of $130 million. So that does not include any value engineering that would lower that cost or unanticipated inflation that would raise that cost, correct?
Yeah, okay, I'm unmuted, sorry. My understanding that's already embedded in the Corps of Engineers cost estimate. You are absolutely correct. Those are two key features that need to be included in a cost estimate element. Value engineering usually happens post 60% design or so. So that's embedded. And they have included escalation from what Colin and Mark tell me. So to the best of my understanding, those are included.
Right, and so, but when they get finished with this PED phase, how much closer are they going to be to a real number?
Yeah, after PED, yeah, I'm still having trouble with that acronym. I always just refer to it as final design. They should have bid documents at that point. So, you know, the accuracy of the cost at that point, it should be pretty tight, right? 10% accurate, within plus or minus 10%. And I mean, we'll get slightly smaller once we get the bids back. So should be pretty tight. We should be ready for bid by the time PED is done.
So when we look at this by October, November, we're going to be very confident about what PMLS will cost, correct?
October, once PED is done, which is still a couple of years out, that's I think 2 or 3 years out, then you are right, we will have a much better idea what that is. So PED will start this summer, and then it takes I think it's 3 years to
3.5 years for the PED
there we go.
phase.
3.5 years to finish that, and then we'll have that point of being able to bid.
Okay, so that leaves me a little bit uncomfortable unless I can get some sort of comfort level from Colin or you, Bill, that 130 is really the number that we should be budgeting. Because what I see in this is if we have, you know, I'm not expecting the big dig in Boston where it went from 2.3 million to 16.3, but what we should be doing is leaving ourselves enough flexibility that if the final cost of the PMLS comes in significantly higher, that we have the funds available for it. And I just want to get a sense as to what that could or should be.
Yeah, your instinct's the same as mine, Eric. And there was one, as of the slides that we raced through at the beginning, there was one note at the very bottom says more details of the cost will be coming. That's the type of thing I'm hoping we can provide a little more information for. So yeah, both you and I would feel a little more comfortable about the number.
And the reason I'm raising this is that as we look at the asset and liability report that we completed in June of 2021 versus the same set of lists, there have been some significant increases in our projected costs. The cost of Broadmoor went from 3.7 to 7. The cost of Schmear Road went from only 3.6 to 4.6, so that's not bad. The cost of the shop buildings went from 5 to 25 million.
Yeah.
Right, so numbers. There are some really, really, really big changes in just 2 years' time, and it is a real cause of concern because when we look at what we're planning to do with this and recognize that in 2 years' time, we've got, in some cases, a 5-fold increase in the cost, that what we're going to face is we're going to do the PMLS. That will be done. And everything else is going to get squeezed. And so I'm really kind of cautious about this because I don't want to be in a position where, you know, the $175 million bond package looks great, but suddenly we've got lots of areas of spending that won't be covered, that we've told the public that will be.
Yep.
So, you know, this is, you know, at this point, the numbers are really kind of fuzzy. I think directionally, what you're spending money on reflects the mandate of our organization. And I'm delighted that you plugged in $10 million for floodplain storage, which is a net new add that was not in our asset and liabilities report. So thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. And let me say that I'm not really in a position to dig into the cost today, but we all should dig into the cost a little bit more than what you have now. But let's do that at a future meeting when we've done our QC check.
Thanks for that, Bill. Steve? Oh, your hand went down. Oh, no, there you are.
And I'll keep this brief because I know I'm still reverberating, but I just want to say I think Bill's doing a really good job of, he's reached out to me, he's reached out to, I know, many others to try to figure out what other jurisdictions do for contingency. You can't be, it's difficult, but we have gone through a historic period of construction inflation in the last few years. So that's why you see these incredible cost spikes and construction costs. We just received a bid the other day that was actually $1.5 million under our estimate. Finally, we're starting to see things calm down and go back down. Yeah, that was a big deal for us. It was a significant surprise, and it was not anticipated. So I guess my point is, it's a balancing act. You can't be too conservative and ask, you know, the public for too much information and have it fail. It's something this board's going to have to, obviously, it's a calculated risk, but all of Eric's comments are valid and definitely, personally, you know, I think having a package that's on the higher end that includes, that it hopes to do more, but it has a little bit of room in case costs escalate more than we anticipate, to value engineer or remove some projects. I guess that is there's value to that. So thank you.
Nancy?
Can't hear you.
Here we go. Better?
Yes.
Okay, so this is a little bit of a bonehead question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So the GEO bond that we're getting, how long do we anticipate? Is that like a 10-year bond? Like we're going to spend it all in 10 years? 10?
Yeah, so that's a perfectly reasonable question, and it partly depends on what the board wants to do.
Right.
So we are assuming as staff that all this work will be completed within 10 years, A, but B, the payback period would be 20 years. So
okay,
that's our working assumption.
Great. And so as you've outlined these three scenarios, I mean, it seems to me that they're all really important. I understand why you gave us choices. I mean, it's all of those pumps and et cetera have to be replaced eventually. And so for the 250 version, we would be anticipating that we'd have the need and the capacity to replace, you know, do all that work in that time, because that's happening at the same time as PMLS and things like that. Correct? So we feel pretty confident that, well, no, let me ask the different question. Of course you feel confident, otherwise you wouldn't have put it before us. If we go for a lower version of the bond, those things still need to happen. So in those out years, how are we proposing, do we know yet how we're proposing to fund our capital work?
The out years. So
Beyond 10 or
yeah, beyond 10. So if I'll make sure I understand your question right. So if we select, if the board selects us one of the lower valued bonds, there is not a current funding source for those larger investments that are listed in here. So the board at that time will have to make a decision what type of revenue they would like to seek, whether it's grants, whether it's another bond possibly, to cover those things that will be at the end of their useful life.
Okay, thank you.
And Nancy, I can note that so there's definitely other general obligation bonds, something that is available to the Urban Flood Safety Water Quality District, but it will require a history of revenue, our revenue bonds. And so that's part of the strategy for out years, as well as grants and other things.
All right, Seth?
Yeah, just a question and then a comment. It seems, so you mentioned that the preliminary engineering process was going to start soon and was going to take 3.5 years. And most of the projects in phase 1 are those projects. How long before those are done, and when does, I guess I'm wondering, the 10 years, you got 3 phases of projects laid out for us. When does phase 2 and phase 3 start and conclude, kind of generally?
It's a little fuzzy, Seth, but we're anticipating just splitting into thirds. So phase 2 would begin about year 4, and year 3 would the third phase would start about year 7.
Okay. And then it seems like there's the projects in the PMLS and the FEMA are pretty well fleshed out and defined for the description, and the stuff that's pushing to phase 3 is a little fuzzier. But that's also, I guess, just a comment of I don't think there's any question that the PMLS and FEMA projects are going to be recommended in the GEO bond. The stuff that's not in that is the stuff that I think is going to be where the board, or at least where I'm going to spend most of my time focusing on, is this necessary and should we include this in the GEO bond? And that's where the details are a little more broad and less defined, but that's where you're going to need us to make the decisions. I'll spend a lot of the decision making and discussion. And so just for kind of future meetings where we're going to be talking about this, I'd like more information about that. And then I'd like to maybe see about having a conversation of, with those projects that aren't PMLS or FEMA required, it's, do we include this in the bond? Do we find another way to do it, or do we not do it? Because it looks like there might be some projects that might be necessary, but might be hard to include and sell in a bond. And as necessary as they are, I think making sure that we pass what's needed and it's going to be immediate is kind of the first priority. So I don't know how you guys have thought about that or want to structure that conversation, but at least so that we can start to sort some of those things into different categories and have some tools to be able to talk about what gets put into a bond versus not. So those are my comments. Thanks.
Yeah, I appreciate that feedback, Seth. I would characterize it maybe slightly differently because I'm an engineer. I would say that the PMLS work has advanced in its project scoping and planning phase further than the other projects, even the FEMA projects. What the FEMA projects are slightly different because there's a regulatory driver and financial driver to get those finished. To make sure that the residents in the managed floodplain can retain their access to insurance, the subsidized insurance. So FEMA, certainly you're right. PMLS has been examined. Detail. There's been engineering planning done, and the details are there. But I'm happy to walk through that in subsequent meetings.
James?
Yeah, just quickly, I appreciate all of the detail in the bond scenarios, packet materials that were provided. I have to say though, whether it's being able to ask questions about specific projects or to be able to speak generally to what information I would need before we start going out to the public, or to ask a different set of questions related to the 3 tiers we've proposed. This is such a big topic. And I don't know if this would violate public meeting law and rules. It seems to me that we might want to create some sort of master document that so board members can take a deeper dive into the materials that have been provided and get those questions in a place that can be tracked. And also so that we can see the questions and considerations of other board members, because again, this is, and part of it is that I've had my head so deeply into the topic of Fund 1 financing and the operating revenue model, that this is a whole other thing. And I think it's going to be difficult to get everyone in a meeting on the fly to kind of talk about what they need to go forward, and then how we do that as a team or as a unified board. So I would just suggest that as a possibility.
Yeah, I like where you're going with that, James. Let me work with Jim and Hong and others to see if we can pull that together.
Thanks, James. Eric?
Still, over and above what we have in the bond issue, we still have what I'll call operating capital needs. This is a replacement of assets, a bulldozer here, a forklift there, that we as the urban will have to be planning for just to raise money from the landowners in order to pay for this. So those shorter lived assets, let's say they only have a 5 or 6 year life, those are going to be excluded from this, correct?
That is correct. I appreciate you bringing that up too. Just as a reminder, there are at least two sources of funding for capital improvements. This is for really big stuff. There's operating capital, ongoing capital, smaller stuff that's, to me, it's less than $1 million a pop as a working number that we would have to pay for through normal annual revenue.
Right, and I think that's really wise for us to think about doing match maturity funding for the assets. So long line assets, we deal with a 20-year bond. Vehicles, that would be sort of like, taking out a 30-year mortgage on a car that's only going to last 5 years. And we don't want to do that. So I think that if we can have that as a way to start to think about the buckets of who do we ask and what do we ask for, that would align it with the economic life of the asset, and the financing mechanism would be worthwhile.
Yeah, good point. Maybe just by coincidence, maybe not, all the ones that are listed in these 3 phases are 25, 30-year life, design life or useful life, or longer. Pipes are 100 years or something to that effect. But your point is well taken. Thank you.
Let's hear from Mary Helen, and then I want to do the quick poll. So I'll tee that up in the chat and explain it after you go, Mary Helen, okay?
Okay, I think you kind of answered this, Bill, but what if a pump, some of the pumps you said were aging pumps? What if the Schmear Road pump goes out tomorrow, or somebody breaks in, or how do you cover for that? Does it take it out of the 100? I mean, in my estimation, and I know I voted against the budget, but if all these things are essential and you are the person that determines that they're essential, and it sounded like they are, why not just ask for the whole enchilada, 175 million? What would be the reasoning to go for the 130 million and then need to get more as things happen or happen predisposed? I mean, there could be all kinds of things, the 33rd and that ditch and clogging it up, or along the levee. So I tend to be asked for all that we could get, as opposed to ask for a little bit and need more later and have to search for that through grants or other bonds or selling lemonade on a corner somewhere.
Right. Yeah, hopefully we won't have to get our kids to do that. So, yeah, it's a fair point. Any organization, including ours, you'll see this in the revised revenue forecast that Jim and Lori are going to be proposing here in a near future meeting. We'll have a contingency fund or reserve, if you will, for the district, and for things like if a pump went out, for instance, as Tanny well knows, that happened at Sandy Pump Station in SDIC recently, and it was just under $300,000 to get the whole new pump replaced, and that money would have to come from the reserve of the district in order to pay for that. Honestly, the variability of bond values is based upon what the board's appetite for risk is. We presented the bonds in a manner that, to me, reflect what the highest risk items are, and that's what the 175 million is. The things that are at the $225 million bond is super important. They don't need to be replaced right now. They need to be replaced in 2030, 2035, 2040, assuming they fail at a standard useful life. So it's possible that we defer some of that and not include it into the current bond now. You're kind of rolling the dice a little bit, because if one of those fails, it's a big ticket item. But you could not include some of those now, and go out for another bond or a different funding mechanism later on. But that's really your board's appetite on whether or not how much risk you want to entail. So I hope that answers your question.
It did, and thank you for that, because it's a good selling point. We want to replace the things that'll cause you the most grief. I mean, I guess that could be a selling point, but I guess I trust your judgment and your engineers, because it's like I've said to my cardiologist about my heart. Who am I going to question? Somebody that went to medical school and spent hundreds of thousands of dollars, and I'm going to come in and say, no, you should have done this. So I believe that the information you're giving us is accurate and beneficial, and that is a good selling point to voters. Now, whether they care enough or not, or know what the levy is another important piece of all this.
Thanks, Mary Helen. Hey, so I put in the chat, and I'm sharing the screen. You can see the screen in front of you, hopefully, that we wanted to do just a check, just a quick check, temperature check about kind of where you all are with the information that's been provided in your packet about the scenarios. All you do is you go to www.menti.com, just put it into your browser. It'll take you right to a screen. It'll ask for a code. You put in this code, and then you can answer these questions. So it looks like we've got 5 folks that have answered the question so far, and then you can see it on the screen. So
Jamie, Commissioner Stegman has her hand up.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see that. Commissioner Stegman?
Thank you. No worries. And I know we're almost at time, so if there's not time to answer this, but I'm just kind of trying to wrap my head around the different scenarios. So the 175 million is 14 cents per thousand. And maybe I missed this meeting, but so when we do the math, if we're using, I don't know, a $500,000 tax assessed residential property, is that right? That it come out to like $70 a year?
I didn't do the math,
yeah.
but I could try.
Well, so that's what, because I mean, if I did the math right, I mean, I'm coming up based using 500,000, and that may be high.
That's high for the average assessed value. I know that, but I think we're closer to just under 300. But in any case, a $500,000 assessed home would pay that many cents per thousand on 500 if that's where it's
Right.
assessed value.
Well, that's what I'm trying to get at is that, so if based on those numbers, it'd be $70 and that's per year, is that right? For the
Yep.
175 million, $80 for the 200, $100 for the 250. So my question is that, and maybe you've already done this, Jamie, so has there been polling on those dollar amounts yet?
We've done initial polling on, and you'll see we did initial polling last fall on the GEO bond packaging. And as we get up to the higher numbers, our level of certainty in terms of the numbers of people that are supporting it goes down, but it's still high. And so we did in previous presentations at previous board meetings, we had materials that walked through all the polling results. I think it was 2 meetings ago, we walked through. Yeah.
Okay, and then more technically, a technical question. So I know there was a column for the 150. I guess I want some clarification around what the definition of baseline is versus accredited. So, and I know staff is recommending the 175 million. So what I'm really trying to get at is what is the absolute bare minimum to maintain accreditation? And is that the same as when you say baseline?
The short answer is no, it's not the same. So if you just focus on PMLS, maybe this is what Seth was referencing earlier. If you just focus on PMLS and FEMA, it's lower than 150,000. If you include other projects that staff feel are at high risk that need to be addressed, that bumps it up to, well, honestly, 175.
Okay, that's great. And then going back to the other question too, about, what in future costs of money, I guess I'm not really clear about, if we go for is our logical argument to go for the 250 million because of the savings that we would have because of future costs and inflation?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I've not delved into that as much now. But that's real, right? So if you replace something in 10 years as opposed to 15 years, you're going to be saving money because the 5 years of escalated construction costs is real. I have not gone through that analysis yet. So I'll put that
it might be a good argument if we decided to go with a higher, the 250. So thank you.
Yeah, and the other thing, Commissioner Stegman, I'll share is when we talk with our political consultants, one of the things they've said is there's a risk in going out, with sort of a lower number now and then realizing you need more later and going out with another later. This is such a wonky conversation that we really have our best shot is to make our best case now to the public. And so there is just some risk in going out later. So that's just something to keep in mind that they wanted us to consider. Hopefully people have a chance to do the poll. I know we're at 5. I want to just share it really quick and so everybody can see where we are. So it doesn't tell me exactly how many people have participated, but hopefully you've had a chance to go in. Jim?
Jamie, I think in the icon in the lower
Oh, there it
right-hand
is.
corner,
Yep,
I see a
5.
number.
Yeah. So if you can go in, you just go to Menti, put in the code, takes like 10 seconds. It really would help us to give a good sense of where people are on the board in terms of understanding the scenarios, that you've got enough information about the scenarios, that you support the education engagement work group beginning to talk with the public. And again, so next steps that I shared at the beginning, we've got time on your May 3rd agenda. We have time on your May 18th agenda. We're really hoping to build your comfort level and understanding of the scenarios between now and the 18th, so that when we do this temperature check, closer to the 18th, we have your thumbs up to go out and have these conversations with the public and gather more input. That we've got 7. So yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and turn it back to Chair Ellison left, But so I think we still have Chair Fancher, and I don't know if there's any last minute things that you need to do before you close out the meeting.
If I could say briefly, just, I know there's a lot of information in this packet, and I know that we had some time for questions and folks process in different ways as what they heard today. So please, in your last board packet, you got a list of every question that was asked on March 16th. And we have tried, I believe, in almost every case, we have to some extent answered those questions. Though there was one that about when the asset life of each project was relative to the scheduling that we're going to do a little more on, and Bill mentioned a little more on cost estimating. But just feel free to keep sending those questions in. We'll try to be as responsive, as we're able, and also as transparent to the comments earlier, and maintain those same kind of Q&As, or just make sure that you're all seeing the questions that others are asking and what answers we're getting. So please continue to share those things that you need. Thanks.
Chair Fancher, back to you.
Sorry, I was filling my poll out. Is my mic any better?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, I fiddled with the settings. So I had recently gone through a computer software upgrade, so I think it messed with my stuff. Any other questions? I know it's been an exhausting meeting. We're over time, so I don't think we're going to entertain any more today. I'm going to make that executive decision.
I had just a quick one. Do we have a new board member yet, or any candidates? Okay.
We do have some candidates. Jim and I need to check in and see their level of interest and ability to commit before coming back to the board for discussion. But yeah, we do have some potentials.
And Mary Helen, we worked with the person you recommended, and they withdrew. I think there might have been a health concern that arose.
Yeah, his mom's seriously ill in Texas, but
yeah, it's bummer. And then
the other one that the
sorry, go ahead.
OCCNL guy, yeah.
Then two people who have expressed written interest, and Steve's going to follow up and chat with them. One is from Diversified Marine, and the other is from Mosaic Ecology. Both do work in the floodplain.
I'm glad for the Mosaic Ecology one.
Yeah, and the Diversified Marine folks were interested. It was I'm excited to have somebody who builds stuff consider it too.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody. We'll see you next time. We're going to adjourn the April 20th meeting of the Urban Flood Safety Water Quality District. Thank you.
Thank you all for your time.
Thank you.